Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. I'm here with my buddies Greg Sterling, John Gerard, and Neil Polachek. Hey guys, what's
Hello.
up? How are you?
I was just flashing on the Brady Bunch with this kind of floor grid, kind of thing.
For Hollywood Squares.
Yeah.
Today we're going to talk about a few interesting things that happened this week. Google and Apple, lots of news going on with what's happening with search in Safari, and we'll dig into that. A couple of weeks ago, Shopify's CEO was talking about how you're going to have to create a really strong argument to hire any new headcount and prove that AI can't do the job. Duolingo followed that up this week with something interesting, so we'll get into that. Visa and MasterCard are creating agentic commerce. So what does that mean? We'll talk a little bit about how they're reinventing the way people buy things. And the future of ads in ChatGPT and Google, will this ruin the user experience? TBD, we'll dig into it. And then some notes from the field that John will talk about, some interesting insights there. So let's lead off with our story about Apple and Google search within Safari and what happened there. Greg, you wanna lead off with that one?
Sure. So Apple executive Eddy Cue testified this week in the Google remedies trial, which is going on. Google was found to be an illegal monopoly earlier last year. And now this is the portion of the proceeding that determines what the remedies are going to be, or what the antitrust curbs are going to be. And so he was testifying about the default search relationship between the two companies, and presumably he was trying to save that. That's $20 billion a year for Apple, and he was trying to save that deal, which is one of the things that probably will get cut or prohibited going forward. But his testimony was kind of weird in that context, and maybe it makes sense, but it was also kind of interesting and strange. So he said, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, the reason we were with Google is because they were the best search engine out there. There wasn't really any better competitor. But now AI is getting really good, and we're thinking about adding multiple AI tools to Safari. We think ultimately AI is going to supersede traditional search. And we saw the first decline of Safari search usage in the entire history of our relationship with Google in April. So that sent investors to sell Google. Their stock dropped by 7%. I think it was either Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday. And I don't know if it's recovered at this point. It probably has. But it reflects the nervousness of investors who are looking for any sign that Google is losing market share. There's any weakness in demand for Google search. And so he also spoke about a decade hence, we may not need iPhones anymore. The iPhone may be obsolete, and we may be doing different, we may be accessing the same kind of information in different ways, presumably with AI as one of the central parts of that experience. So he said a lot of things that were sort of damaging to Google, and possibly Apple as well, because it implied the iPhone was, had a lifespan that was going to be over pretty quickly. So I think what he's saying is obviously we're sympathetic to it, or at least I am, that AI is getting really good. A lot of people are turning to AI. Google has seen some erosion in usage. It's not being wiped out, but it has seen some defections. And it's just interesting that Apple is sort of betting more heavily now on AI going forward.
So what do you think that does to the user experience, or did they mention anything about what this means for Google and Safari, or any future kind of looking?
I think what's going to happen is that the judge is going to say no more paid default deals, no more $20 billion, Apple. You can offer different choices of search engines or whatever, but you're not going to get this exclusive payment. Google is not going to be able to buy exclusivity as they have. And I think a lot of people in that situation, in some sort of choice environment, will still choose Google. But if they make it equally possible to choose ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude, in addition to Google or Microsoft Copilot, I think you'll see some number of people embracing that. And, Apple's had its own problems with Siri and Apple Intelligence, and they're trying to shore that up. They did some shifting around of personnel to try and, accelerate the upgrades there. So I think, Apple plans on a bigger embrace of AI going forward. And I think some number of consumers will go with that and sort of abandon Google. I don't know how big that number will be.
Does it strike any of you odd that Apple's not doing something very proprietary on their own? Like they're looking at all these other players. I just, given what he said about,
they should buy somebody. They definitely should buy somebody.
To me, something seems like maybe this is all distracting, to distract people from thinking about what they really are doing inside of Apple. I gotta believe that
he was testifying under oath. About these things.
Yeah, but was the other conversation? There was another thing out there about it. I just think they got to be doing something much bigger than looking for partners.
I think so too. I think that they have historically had a pretty bright line around, what they build versus what they partner on. And, when it's come to things like the internet at large and the other services offered by other people, they've been, sort of more inclined to partner, until they don't, right? So payments is a good example of that, where like all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, look, now we have Apple Pay. Sorry, everybody else. And this feels like that might be a similar moment here, which is like, let's partner on search, let's partner on AI, and then oops, maybe we're not going to do that anymore. More with AI than search, but I think.
But the question is who would they buy, right? A lot of these companies now have valuations that are kind of exaggerated or prohibitive, and there's probably a handful of smaller players that they could buy out there still.
That's a good question, and I don't know. Like under normal circumstances, their buy would probably be an acqui-hire anyway. Like they don't tend to buy a whole lot of technology that they plug in. They buy people. And presumably they've got some sort of an internal AI motion on the people side. So, it and especially again, given the open nature of most of these foundational models, it feels like the kind of thing that there may be an internal skunk works around that where they sort of, pull back the curtain in 6 months or so and do an actual, Apple Intelligence that really works at that point.
It's really theirs. They got $160 billion in cash. Okay.
They're definitely in the driver's seat with the amount of money that they have. If you kind of forecast it out, here's what they're up against. They've got ChatGPT has threatened to create their own AI phone, their own AI computer and hardware that could potentially be a threat to Apple at some point. And they're going to need some technology to help them accelerate this. It seems to me that Nvidia could be an interesting partner, where Nvidia has not only got the hardware, but they've got really compelling software and a large language model that they could fork and create, an instance of that for Apple to say they want to do a much more strategic deal with Nvidia that could be not necessarily exclusive, but maybe exclusive for a particular use case, where that's their acquisition essentially, is acquire that large language model or fork of that to accelerate their time to market, and then do some sort of hardware deal with them at the same time to create the next generation of AI first computing, both on their phones and on computers as well. I don't know. If I'm Apple, I'm definitely thinking about stuff like that. That's going to box out, anybody else who's thinking about creating any kind of hardware approach.
And don't forget, I think almost all of Apple's stuff sits on AWS servers. So there's another player that I gotta believe they're having very significant conversations with.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Let's move on to our next story, just to keep things moving here. So Duolingo this week announced that they're going to be doing away with a number of jobs through their contractor network, and this piggybacks on Shopify CEO a couple of weeks ago saying that they weren't going to hire anybody without a strong argument as to why AI can't do the job. Neil, you want to talk a little bit about this?
No.
Okay.
I'll talk briefly about it. I'll talk very briefly about it.
Sorry, Andy.
All right. So this is not quite as harsh as the Shopify position, which was partly a performance for Wall Street. I think the Duolingo CEO, with sort of periodic, affectionate, statements about how they love their employees, said in a letter to employees, "Hey, we're gonna be AI first. This is the future. We're gonna get rid of our contractors." I don't know how many they were using, but I gather it was pretty extensive. You know, to help with the translations and some of the other services. They are going to presumably just really restrict the hiring that they do going forward, relying more and more heavily on AI. He didn't say anything like, we're not going to hire a human until it can be justified by, comparison with AI's limitations or anything. But it's kind of a softer version of what the Shopify CEO did. All the tech companies, once they started doing layoffs, all of them did layoffs, right? It was like a kind of a hive mind thing where, Microsoft laid off people and Google laid off people. And,
Yeah.
and
we're all given
I mean,
permission. Once one did it, they all have permission.
right. And part of that is, again, for investors, to show they're tough and they're disciplined and they're cost conscious. But I do think that this kind of mindset is going to make its way through a lot of companies. We want to see how much we can do with AI, with existing resources, and really scale back hiring, which will be, problematic for the economy if we do go into recession. That might promote some additional layoffs. But once you come out of recession, that's usually a bunch of hiring starts, but maybe not. I'm speculating kind of a couple of waves out, but I think I think we'll see more of this kind of stuff in companies, especially public companies.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there's two interesting things about this for me. So one of them is that it's kind of inverting the usual AI drumbeat. So the usual drumbeat is like, hey, you should probably try to use AI and figure out how it works. And we're encouraging employees to do that. Now it's inverting that message and saying you actually can't not use AI. Like, you're going to be required, before you actually spend any of our money on other things, to try AI first. So that's subtle, but I think critical. The second thing, more germane to the larger kind of economic picture. So a lot of companies are in order to try to thread the needle here on, hey, we're good to our people, we're not trying to displace humans. They're sort of playing this game, which they can do if they're growing fast enough, saying we have stopped hiring. We're not going to fire anybody, but we have stopped hiring. And what's going to happen is, as we have natural attrition, AI is going to fill those gaps, and we're going to kind of have this natural substitution of work. I think that's plausible, feasible for some companies. Some have even gone so far as to say the people who stick around will actually participate in the upside created by AI, which is a fascinating statement. The issue with that, of course, is that if everybody does that and nobody's hiring, we have a hiring problem, right? So you've sort of solved the problem at the company level of like, we're not bad guys, like we're actually doing right by our people, and but they're just not adding to their people, at the rate that they might have otherwise. So what that does, on the sort of larger job market front remains to be seen.
Well, and the idea of starting to assess people's performance in relation to their facility and understanding of AI, their ability to utilize it effectively in their jobs is going to happen also. Yeah. So that'll be a component of performance reviews, which will be in turn tied to compensation. And and more tech companies are stack ranking people, so the bottom third get either asked to leave or treated in such a way that they leave voluntarily. So AI becomes a more critical part of the remaining employees' performance, for better or for worse.
What he was saying here in his letter, I'll just read some of the letter that he wrote to the employees. He says that AI isn't just a productivity boost. To teach well, we need to create massive amount of content, and doing that manually doesn't scale. And then he goes on to say, making minor tweaks to systems designed for humans won't get us there. So in many cases, we'll need to start from scratch, and we're not going to rebuild everything overnight, but we're not going to wait until the technology is 100% perfect either. So the guidelines that he talks about is he says that we're going to be rolling out a few constructive constraints to help guide the shift. And there are some bullet points here. So what those bullet points are is that they'll gradually stop using contractors to do work that AI can handle. AI will be part of what they're looking for in hiring. AI will be used to evaluate performance reviews. Headcount will only be given to a team that cannot automate their work. And then more functions will have specific initiatives to fundamentally change how they work. So, that the idea is that they're really switching their culture to more of an AI first kind of a culture. It's interesting. I mean, it's a massive change in the way that not only are they changing the way that they're what they're requiring of their employees, but changing a culture of a big company like that. It's a big boat to change in the harbor there. So how they're going to turn that boat is going to be interesting to follow.
Just real quickly, I know we're trying to get through a lot of material today, but real quickly, there was an IBM sponsored study that found that I can't cite the methodology beyond that it was a survey of enterprise executives, and only 25% of them said that AI had achieved the ROI that they had anticipated. So that's a kind of counterpoint to this bullishness that is being demonstrated here. But I think this attitude that Shopify and Duolingo now are reflecting in their policies is gonna catch fire. I think we're going to see a lot more companies do a version of this and say, where the executives say, this is how it's got to be. We're going to do this, and then figure out the details as they go.
And inside of all these companies, there are going to be people who try and keep it from happening. The old guard, it's going to go on. And people who push it are going to get thrown out because they were too. I mean, we know what's going to happen in all these companies. Some of these will manage through it well. Some of them it'll blow up in their faces. But I wanted to add something to what John said quickly. I talked to two 35-year-old-ish people this week, both in MarTech. Both said to me, I think it's time to go buy a small business like a plumbing company or electrician business or something like that. So all those people who aren't going to get hired are going to start to gravitate to the trades businesses that we know are not, they could be run better. I think there's something interesting that's going to go on in the next 5 and 10 years in terms of where people spend their time, what they learn, and what skills they acquire over time. It's going to be really fascinating to me.
There's this whole concept of the silver tsunami, right? All these people who are now older that own their businesses, their kids don't want to take over the business. Right. They're trying to figure out a path forward. So this is a whole wave of entrepreneurs going into those really boring businesses, but then evolving them into, more modern kind of experiences. So that's kind of one a trend that's happening. And then, interestingly, this week I saw a video from Y Combinator where they're talking about how in an AI first world, you've got a couple of kinds of companies. You've got companies that are developing tools using AI that they're selling now to companies, and that's one way to go to market. Or you just take over a company in whatever line of business, legal, whatever category it might be, and then use the tools to really bypass competitors in that market. And just from a macro kind of perspective, it's really interesting to see how those trends will play out. But apparently, Y Combinator is looking to invest a lot in people who are building these AI first companies that are they just want to be the best in their category. They're not selling tools, they're not picks and shovels. It's not that kind of a play. It's I want to go build the best legal firm or the best plumbing firm or the best roofing company or whatever using AI tools first.
From the get-go.
Yeah.
Anyway, It was an interesting conversation with two people who've been in MarTech, good, big achievers, ready to get out.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
That's cool.
Well, cool. All right. Well, let's move on to our next story here around agentic commerce. Visa and MasterCard are talking about creating agents that buy things on your behalf. I mean, what could go wrong?
They already do. It's called fraud.
So, Dad, you want to frame it up, and then we can all chime in on that.
We can do this quickly. PayPal, Visa, and MasterCard are all creating the infrastructure for agentic commerce, where the agent goes out and conducts transactions on behalf of the user, whether that's initiated on a keyboard or through voice or through some other mechanism, biometric somehow other than voice. They're creating sort of secure systems and tools that will allow agents to execute these transactions. And it's part of this sort of value chain or ecosystem now of agentic, search, commerce, etc., which we were talking about before we started recording with Manus, for example. And I think it's inevitable and it's important, and it will help accelerate things in the same way that each of these pieces, agent to agent protocols and the MCP, build out this universe.
This reminds me a tiny bit of, the earliest use cases, early days of Alexa, when, the supposition was that people would be using Alexa to buy stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Alexa, hi Alexa, thank you for finding it. Alexa, please purchase 100 tubes of Colgate toothpaste.
It's going to do it. You got to be careful. It's going to do it.
There were all those stories about, there was the 7-year-old girl in Toledo who managed to order 17 unicorns from Amazon, sort of hacking Alexa, or they just showed up on the front doorstep. So, but I actually think that ultimately that was a fairly low contribution to Amazon's commerce, people buying stuff through Alexa, and it kind of evolved into being something, quite useful for other things. The part of me wonders whether the same thing might be true here. That part of shopping for a lot of people, and I would include myself in this a little bit, it is actually, I want to go out and look around and kick the tires and see what's what. Like, I don't particularly want something to figure this out for me and go do it blindly. A
lot of men don't share your enjoyment of that process.
It's with very specific things, like my running shoes and my electronics. Like, if you want to get my wardrobe, okay, now we're talking. Like go knock yourself out.
That's clearly true, John.
Yeah.
Buy yet another black beanie.
Another black beanie and another black t-shirt. Yes, exactly. Yes. So if I can get agents to do that for me and find some brands that make my shoulders look better, then I'm all for it. So, yeah. But, we'll see. It has me wondering, right? Like how much of this, to your point, Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal doing it, do they have an incentive here? Yeah, they do.
Of course.
It strikes me as just the very first piece of friction that I can imagine getting rid of is just having to enter your information time and time again. And even though we're in 2025 and you have autofill and all this stuff, I don't know about you guys, but I'm always faced with that. I'm like, really? Like, every time I'm faced with that, I'm like, isn't there a solution for this already? So,
well, this is that solution, right?
It seems like it. So, that'll be interesting. Anyway, let's go on to our notes from the field. John, you had you had some ideas before we started recording. What are your observations from the field this week?
Yeah. So two quick ones. So the first one is I ran a test this week, which was I let my ChatGPT trained coach run my entire week. It was a busy week.
How does that work?
Yeah. Well, so I shared a screenshot of my calendar. I told it all the things I was trying to do. I said, help me figure out how to achieve these goals on a daily basis. I'm going to check in multiple times per day with new things that have come up, help me rearrange my schedule or my priorities in order to hit everything. And give me feedback as I'm going. And I basically have followed his recommendations. And it's been a wildly interesting and useful experiment. And I think for two reasons. One is it really helped me to organize things, especially as things were changing throughout the week as they do. And then the other that was kind of fascinating to me is I got feedback on what was happening that I wasn't able to see myself. And that was really a light bulb moment for me. It really did feel like somebody kind of looking over my shoulder saying, hey, and the example was a simple one. I had 4 things going on where I was pushing things and I needed somebody else to come back to me on each of them. And I had missed the case that was going on in these 4 different projects. And it came back to me and said, hey, one of the reasons you're feeling frustrated is you're in this loop right now where you're waiting on other people to move these projects ahead. And that's super normal. And here's what you do about it. And I was like, wow, that's exactly right. Now, one could argue that I should have known that. But when you're in the trenches, sometimes it's hard to see it. So it was a very interesting experiment and actually so useful. I'm going to do it again. And I suspect that I'll have that be my new way of operating.
That's really cool. I'm going to give that a shot next week and see what kind of insights it comes up with.
I've got
you grab a screenshot of your calendar and you dropped it in.
Yeah, so it's a larger pattern that I can share, and we can put it in the show notes too. Like, you have to prime the coach the right way. And by the way, this is the hack for any time you're getting something to weigh in on you. You give it the summary. You're a coach. You're helping me do this, that, and the other. Here are my projects I'm working on. What's important about them, and then you say, ask me 10 questions about me, what I care about, and about these projects that will help you to do the best possible job you can do. And it's that ask me 10 questions that really unlocks the value, because then it actually starts to fill in some of the gaps and forces you to think about what matters to you. And then all of that stuff comes back up in the coaching. I've got a framework. I'll share it with you guys. So
we'll share it in the show notes as well.
Yeah, and I don't know that we have time for the last one. Maybe I'll kick the other one over. The headline is that Google released Agent Space and they don't have any idea what they're doing trying to sell it. And it was kind of a comedic experience trying to get somebody at Google to tell me what Agent Space was. So I'll share more on that next week.
Well, you're talking to Google Cloud people is the problem. I think that's the very first problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Would you like to use Google Agent Space? I don't know. What is it? Can you tell me what it is first? That was the conversation that we had.
Yeah. First, let me sell you some server space, and then it's like, well,
exactly.
What does it do?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, guys. Well, I know we got to wrap it up. So thank you all so much. Thanks everybody for listening this week, and we will catch you next week.
Great to see you guys.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.